Um, I'm going to do one or two more, and one of the questions is about the cruise. I have not heard anything from the cruise agency yet. We're certainly intending to go on this cruise. COVID-19, and I'm not going to use the word coronavirus anymore. Coronavirus is a type of virus of which COVID-19 is one, and it's pointless to muddy the waters by increasingly using terms that don't make any sense. So, COVID-19 is the name of this particular coronavirus. Uh, yes, Talix, I'm very interested in the Virpal stuff. Had nothing to do with anything. Um, COVID-19 is something I mean to do a little writing about. Um, you know what? I'll end with this and just get this because the more I talk about this, the clearer it gets for me. So that in many ways, Stratosphere Lounge is a great place to rehearse these ideas and get feedback and learn things I didn't know and so on. But yeah, well, we'll talk about the virus for a bit, and then I think we'll call it a night. So here's what I see is going on culturally with this whole COVID-19 thing. When you're looking at, and I'm going to deal with viruses specifically here, although what the main points also apply to bacteriological diseases. But when you're dealing with epidemics and pandemics, outbreak of disease, there are two factors involved. One of them is morbidity, and the other one is mortality. Morbidity is how infectious is this disease? How easy is it to catch? How easy does the disease move from one person to another? High morbidity means that it's easy to catch this disease. Mortality means how many people die from the disease. Um, and that's pretty self-explanatory. But these two things together are, Lord Bio says it's not not morbidity. That's what I've read in the several medical texts that I've read. But in any event, that's what I'm going to go with until I know better. So infectiousness, I'm going to call that morbidity, and mortality is how many people it kills. Now, something like what I think is going on in terms of what's happening in front of our eyes is really pretty simple. Think back to Ebola. I did a segment on Ebola when the Ebola outbreak was at its peak in terms of peak hysteria, and I said that Ebola is going to be contained because Ebola's morbidity is low. Its mortality is very high. People who catch Ebola, depending on the strain, whether it's Marburg or whatever, but hemorrhagic viruses like Ebola have a very, very high mortality. In some cases, it's 80%, 90%. So people were terrified of Ebola, and rightfully so. Morbidity is how many people have the disease. Okay, fair enough. That's a good description. I hadn't quite realized the distinction. Thank you for that, Lord Bios. But in any event, I'm still going to use the word morbidity because morbidity it's not necessarily how easily the infection is spread, but how many people get it. So it's close enough to what I want. And that's probably why I misunderstood the term. In any event, here's the thing. How many people can get the disease's virulence? I thought that had to do with the severity of the disease. Let me just use these terms, and I'll research them further. But the point I'm making is the same. Back in the late 2000s, we had a serious outbreak of Ebola. Ebola is a terrible infectiousness. Okay, got it. I will think about that and try and do this on the fly. So when you look at Ebola, Ebola is a deadly disease, but it's not easy to catch. In order to catch Ebola, you have to contact the blood of a person who has the disease. You have to actually touch the blood, and I'm not 100% sure about this, but I'd be willing to bet significantly that you not only have to touch the blood of somebody who's got Ebola, but there has to be a break in the skin because the skin is by far your best defense against all diseases. The skin is essentially invulnerable. It's fantastic. Just about every disease that humans get In fact, the skin is essentially nearly perfect protection. The diseases that the diseases that kill us by getting past the skin. And there are two ways to get past the skin. One way is to punch a hole in the skin. So if I put a cut in my hand or I get a bullet hole in me, now there's a hole in the skin. Now all of these microbes and viruses can get inside me and they can start to get into the second line of defense, which is the immune system, but the skin does almost all of the work. Now, one of the biggest killers of people has been diseases that have been passed, that have gotten into our bodies by holes in the skin, but they're not bullet holes. The holes in the skin that have killed I don't know if billions, but certainly hundreds of millions of people have died because there were holes in the skin that allowed diseases to get inside the skin, and those holes were made by either mosquitoes or fleas. Yellow fever, malaria, those diseases are spread by mosquito bites, but again, the skin protects us against that. It's mosquitoes' ability to get through the skin and drink the blood of an infected person, then bite somebody else and inject the blood of the infected blood past the skin. That's how you spread malaria and yellow fever and things like that. It's a hole in the skin. Black plague, what's going on? Bubonic plague was spread by rats. Rats carried the fleas. The fleas were able to break the skin in a bite, and in the same way that the mosquitoes were, get past the defenses of the skin. So it's holes in the skin that cause us all these diseases, and the deadliest animal on the earth by far, I mean by far, is the mosquito. The mosquito has killed more humans than any other source combined, including all other diseases and all wars put together, natural disasters. I'd be willing to bet that the mosquito is greater killer of humans than any other single source combined. All right, so if you can stop getting holes in the skin, most diseases can't touch you, but others can't. And the way other diseases can get through you is not getting through the skin. There's another way to get inside the body, and that is that the body has 5 holes in it. If you count the nose as 1, we have 5 holes, and these holes are used for intake in most cases, and in some cases they're also used for output, but nevertheless, there are 5 holes in the human body. And if you have time to kill, you can probably figure out what they are. These are holes between the inside and the outside, and there are, and Telex says some are funner than others. He's certainly right about that. But the fact of the matter is that the human body has to somehow get food inside of it and air, oxygen inside of it, and it has to get waste outside. And so that means you have to have holes in your body. Yes, he's right. The tear ducts count too, but well, people are always making my life so damn difficult. So there are holes in your body, and some diseases are able to get into those holes. Now, those holes in the body, in terms of the throat and the nose and the other ones, are lined by mucus. The entire pathway into the body is covered with this material, this mucus that infectious agents run into and bounce off of. It's just killed. It just can't get through it. These are called mucous membranes, and your nose is one and your mouth is one, and so are the other ones. They've got a lining of mucus that protects the pathway into the body so that even though pathogens can get inside the actual body, they can't get through the protection on the holes in the body. So far, so good. Some viruses are able to get through these, and bacteria are able to get through these mucous membranes, so they can, in fact, defeat the lining on the holes in our bodies. And Covid-19 is one of those. Influenza, which is what Covid-19 is a virus that is able to get through the mucous membrane. And since it is able to get through the mucous membrane, it does not require a hole punched in the body by a bullet or a mosquito. Because you can defeat malaria and you can defeat yellow fever if you can kill the mosquitoes. You can't catch bubonic plague. I'm not talking about pneumonic plague. I'm talking about bubonic plague. You can't catch that if there are no rats and no fleas. Protect yourself against these things because mosquitoes and fleas are enormous compared to the size of the guys that are doing the actual hurting out there. So let's go back to Ebola and the flu, just the regular flu. Ebola has the ability, I don't know if Ebola needs a cut in the skin or not. I just don't know the answer to that. But Ebola is a virus that you have to come in contact with physically, and it's hard to catch. It's difficult to catch. Since it's difficult to catch, you can contain it. If you have a bunch of people and they're bleeding out of their eyes and they've only been sick for 2 or 3 days, you probably have the idea, don't touch that person. And so since those diseases are so fatal, they move so fast, and since you have to come into physical contact with them, you can contain a disease like that. But the flu, on the other hand, that virus is able to live inside the droplets of moisture when you sneeze. It's airborne, and it's worse than airborne. If I sneeze and I've got the flu or a cold, same kind of thing, it's a similar virus. If I sneeze and you're in vicinity, you take those droplets in. Those droplets also get through your mucous membranes, and now your viruses have gotten to me via these little microscopic water droplets. That makes it much, 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 much easier to catch the disease because I don't have to come in physical contact with that person. I only have to be in the same room with them. And furthermore, a virus like the flu can land anywhere from a sneeze, and if I touch that place where that person is sneezed, that doesn't give me the flu, but when I go and brush my nose or do this or rub my eyes, then it does, because now the virus has found its way to the mucous membranes and then it gets inside, and now I'm in trouble. So, Ebola, very high mortality. I'm going to go. I understand what you said there, Lord Bios, and I'm just going to go with this now, and I just have to understand it better. So forgive me. I'm just going to call the ability to transmit the disease morbidity. Ebola, low morbidity, hard to catch, but if you do catch it, fatal in many cases. Flu, easy to catch, but virtually all cases, not so bad, not mortal. Now, what's happening is people watched Ebola outbreak 10 years ago, and they watched the effort to contain Ebola, and they were terrified about keeping Ebola contained because everybody thought, my God, if I get Ebola, I'm going to die. And if you did get Ebola, you were likely to. You were not in good shape. But what we're seeing now is we're seeing the same thing as we saw when they tried to contain Ebola. And I said you could contain Ebola because Ebola, on average, I forget what the number's called, it's something sub-naught, N sub-naught, something like that. There's a number for every single disease that says how many people is this disease likely to infect. In other words, Lord Bios is a biologist, we need to talk. Actually, Lord Bios, can you contact me, please, at info@billwhittle.com and tell me your real name? I very much want to talk to you about this. I need to get these terms straightened out. I'd really appreciate it. So what people watched was an attempt to R sub naught. Now, when I did this piece on Ebola, I had a lot of people criticize me, say, no, you don't understand, Bill. You just doomed people. Ebola is going to wipe us all out. This was 7-8 years ago. And I said, I don't think so, because the number for Ebola is lower than 1. In other words, every single person who gets Ebola is likely to infect less than 1 person. It can still infect people, but on average it's lower, and that means that the disease will burn itself out. The flu virus can be as high as 3 or 4. That means that every person with the flu is likely to infect 3 or 4 other people. In some cases, it's 1.5, 2. Let's say it's 3 for whatever the sake of it. So, for the sake of it, we'll say that COVID-19 has an R sub naught of 3. Everybody who gets it is likely, on average, when all the numbers are done, to infect 3 other people. You cannot contain a disease like this. It's not containable. Once it's out of either the lab or conceivably the city, it's gone. Once it's out, it's out. Especially in a case of COVID-19, where you may have the virus for 3-4 weeks and not even know it. Every single day you're going to see the number of cases increase, and here's the point I'm trying to make from a political point of view. What's happening to the world right now is people are watching health organizations try to contain a flu virus the way they tried to contain the Ebola virus. And they succeeded with Ebola, but they're not going to succeed with COVID-19. They're not. They can't. I don't see any way that it's possible. And I think most of them have already admitted that, although not publicly. And certainly its point is you should keep trying. It's obviously worth the effort. But what I think is basically happening in society right now is people are seeing that this so-called coronavirus is spreading every day. And they're connecting that with, they're subconsciously connecting that with the lethality of Ebola. And that's why you can have a situation where Shelley, who's our office manager, can go out to a restaurant at brunch this last Sunday and hear the people next to them, see them washing their hands and disinfecting their hands all the time and having a serious conversation about how all of them are probably going to be dead by the end of the year. Not as a joke and not in a sarcastic way or even in a way of like defensive humor. They're convinced that everybody's going to get wiped out by this so-called coronavirus. And the reason they're doing that is because the news media and the government and everybody else is sending the signal that that's going to happen. When somebody decides to do something, I don't know if this has happened yet, but I'll use it as a great example because it's likely to happen. If the day comes, if it hasn't happened already, where the city of Boston declares that we're not going to run the Boston Marathon this year because of COVID-19, what that is telling people is that the risk of catching this thing is so great that they're canceling this event. And since they're canceling event, that must mean that if I catch this thing, I'm going to die. Because if it wasn't serious, they wouldn't. No one's going to say we're going to cancel the Boston Marathon because we have evidence that 3 of the runners in the Boston Marathon have a cold. No one's going to cancel that. So what we're doing is we're making the right effort to try and contain the disease, but the message that we're sending is that while we try to contain this thing, the reason we're trying to contain it is because it's a deadly killer. It's not. It's not a deadly killer. It's serious. It's not nothing. It's not the cold and it's not the flu. I'll get to that in a minute. But this is why people are panicking and continue to panic. They do not understand what they're dealing with here. An airborne virus like COVID-19, an influenza virus, is mutating so quickly that the immune system cannot protect against it. Let's just do a little bit of recap, shall we? And Lord Bios, I'm looking very much forward to hearing from you in person. Hopefully we can have a phone conversation. But the guts of it is basically this. If a pathogen gets past our number one line of defense, which is the skin, if it gets past our second line of defense, which is the mucous membranes that line the holes that are already in our body, and gets into our bloodstream, then the real miracle happens. When a person dies, and it doesn't have to be a person, an animal, or whatever, when you think of the horror of a dead body, what's happening is that body begins to rot. And when you think about a dead, rotting body, what you're seeing is what would be happening to you right this second if you didn't have an immune system. The reason that a body rots and decays when a person dies is because when the person dies, the immune system shuts down. That's what those microbes that are doing to a dead body are trying to do to you all the time. But they're not succeeding because we have, as we're alive, as our biological processes continue, we have a profoundly effective and complex and magnificent defense against those microbes that are there all the time. It's not like all of a sudden microbes just appear on a dead body. They're there all the time. We're swimming in them right this second. We have our skin to protect us. We have our mucous membranes to protect us, but we have our immune system which protects us. And if we didn't have it, we would be the walking dead. These bacteria and viruses would be doing to us what they do to a dead body, but they don't do it to us because we have an immune system. So how does the immune system work? Well, it works in it has 2 different layers, 2 different approaches. One of them is when it sees something that's a pathogen, like a bacteria or a virus or something that's bad for us, once it recognizes that this thing is doing damage, it starts to attack it. And that's a battle that we win sometimes and sometimes we don't. If I cut my hand badly enough and it's septic enough, all of a sudden all of these bacteria are going to get in there, are going to start multiplying, and then it's going to be a race to see whether or not my immune system can win this fight against the infection. And the immune system's going to fight this fight in several ways. One of the first things the immune system's going to do is it's going to raise my body temperature. It's going to give me a fever, because bacteria and viruses don't do as well in high temperatures. They are evolutionarily adapted to 98.6, and if you can raise the temperature of the body, that slows down and kills bacteria and viruses. Now the problem is, are you able to sustain that fever long enough before the fever kills you? It's the immune system doing the best it can. It's its best fight. Parenthetically, one of the things that makes this whole thing really clear and interesting to look at is to look at the influenza pandemic of 1919 and 1920. And here's what's interesting about that. The whole case I'm making, forgive me, Lord Bios, I'll get to this well, I'll see if I can correct it now. Ebola, high mortality, not very infectious. The flu, very infectious, not very high mortality. The flu pandemic of 1919 and 1920 was very high infectious and very high mortality. It was a form of the flu that was particularly deadly, horribly deadly. And one of the things that's so amazing and remarkable about that first pandemic flu outbreak in 1919, which killed 20 million people, maybe 40 around the world. That'd be something like 400 or 500 million people today. The reason that flu was so remarkable was it was so effective at multiplying that most of the people who died from that flu in 1919, 1920, most of them died because of their own immune system. Almost every disease that strikes mankind as an epidemic or a pandemic hits the weak and the young because they don't have as many resources to throw into the fight. Their immune system is not as developed when they're young, and it's not as robust as it is when they get old. But what was so strange about the 1919-1920 flu pandemic is that most of the people it killed were people aged 25 to 40. It hit the most people who died in that pandemic died in the peak of health. The healthier, you could make the case, this is a bit of a simplification, but you could make the case that the healthier you were, the more likely you were to die of that flu in 1920. Now, why is that? Well, as I understand it, it's because that virus multiplied so quickly that the entire body's immune system went, holy God, and went into full-on overdrive and killed the people because it was working too hard. The people who had the most effective immune systems were the ones who were killed by that because the virus so triggered the immune system that people would end up dying of fever. And they'd end up dying of creating too much like inflammation, or when you produce fluids. All of these things are designed to get rid of pathogens. But that virus multiplied so aggressively that the body saw it as the body just activated everything. And then most people were killed by their own immune response to the disease, died of fever, which is generated by the immune system. It's not generated by the virus. The immune system is producing the fever in order to fight the virus. And the same thing for production of mucus, inflammation, all of that stuff. So the people who were the healthiest were killed because they had the best immune system. The immune system was overactivated, and the immune system had so much work to do so fast that it ended up killing the patient. That is amazing. Almost, if you look at the mortality of that virus, you find that the older you were, the better chance you had to live, because your immune system was weaker. I wouldn't go quite this far, but from the limited logic abilities I have, it seems to me, paradoxically enough, that if we were to face that virus again, that flu virus, that 1919 flu virus, the best way to save people would be to give them immunosuppressants, something to knock their immune system down, because the people with the best immune systems were the ones who were being killed by it. So anyway, that was kind of a fluke. High infectiousness, high mortality, and the stronger your immune system was, the more likely you were to die. Now, the last figures I saw, which I think were from last night, I want to say, I think this is right, for COVID-19, I don't think there's been a single fatality, not one, across the world of anybody under the age of 9. And if you look at and the mortality figures go way up if you are older, weaker immune system, and they go way up if you have respiratory diseases. But I forgot something critically important. So the first way the immune system works is the body is in trouble. Viruses are multiplying and all this stuff. So the body goes after them, or bacteria are multiplying. But so the defense systems go after them, and you win that fight or you don't. But if you do, and this is where the immune system is really amazing, if you do win, then the immune system has the ability to actually learn. It recognizes that these little receptor proteins in a certain form are deadly, and it recognizes them. And it says, if I ever see this construction of virus, if I ever see this protein construction again, this is bad news. And that is called immunity. And the reason that's a beautiful thing is that if I inject a single virus, speaking in the broadest possible terms, and let's say I get smallpox and I survive it. My immune system has fought a battle to the death against smallpox, and I happen to win. But the immune system remembers that battle. It remembers it. And so if I get reinfected with smallpox, the smallpox doesn't get a chance to completely overwhelm my system again before the immune system gets on the job. If I've already dealt with smallpox and survived it, then the immune system instantly recognizes it. It doesn't have to wait for it to damage the body enough to nearly kill you. It says, aha, I've seen you before. And it attacks it, and you don't get the disease in the first place because the immune system wipes it out, because the immune system recognizes it. That recognition of pathogens before they do the damage is called immunity. And immunity is very simple. Immunity is the body's immune system learning that this is an enemy instead of having to discover that it's an enemy. It's told in advance. It's not waiting like saying, hey, you come on into the city, and oh my God, the people that we let in 3 days ago, they're raising riot. It's like, no, you look like a Carthaginian to me, and you're not even getting into the building. It's the ability to recognize pathogens before they do their damage. That's what immunity is. Okay, so far so good. So that's why vaccines work. Vaccine is very simple. If I get a shot of smallpox, and I get full smallpox, I'm going to have smallpox and I'll either live or die. But if my immune system wins that battle, I'm immune to smallpox. But the genius of a vaccination is, if somebody were to take the smallpox virus and weaken it, or some cases even kill it, and still inject it into my body, my immune system is going to recognize that, and it's going to protect me in the future. So what vaccinations do is they give you an extremely weakened version of the disease in order for your immune system to recognize that this is an invader, and we need to see, every time we see this, we're going to attack it. And so a vaccine gives you a weak version of the disease. You don't have to fight for your life. And then when the real killer comes along, your immune system already recognizes it, and it's able to destroy it before that virus gets a foothold. Turns out that Edward Jenner was able to figure out this idea of vaccination because he was studying smallpox, and he realized that you may have heard the expression pretty maids all in a row. Milkmaids were considered to be pretty maids, not because they were inherently beautiful, but because milkmaids alone in that era in England, let's just say, milkmaids didn't get the pockmarks, the horrible pockmarks that Edward James Olmos appears to have. Well, his may be from acne. Stalin had. One of the many things that smallpox does, if it doesn't kill you, is disfigure you by leaving all these little craters in your face. And the milkmaids, the pretty maids all in a row, didn't have those holes in their face like just about every other woman who stayed alive in those days. So what happened was that Jenner realized, and a bunch of other people as well realized, that there was something about cowpox. Cowpox made them break out, but it didn't make them break out in nearly the same severity. It didn't make them break out to the degree that it left permanent scars on your face, and most importantly, it didn't kill you. And what they were able to deduce was that these milkmaids had caught a disease called cowpox, which isn't fatal and doesn't disfigure you. But it turns out that the cowpox virus is very, very close to the smallpox virus. And what had happened, without anybody knowing it, there's no medicine involved here, just out of sheer mechanics of how society worked was that if you were milking cows as a young girl and you caught cowpox, you would get sick with cowpox, but it wouldn't kill you. But because smallpox and cowpox were so similar to each other, when smallpox came, your body, which had never met smallpox before, but it had met cowpox, saw smallpox and said, hey, no, sir, and killed the smallpox before it had a chance to infect you. And that's why milkmaids were immune to smallpox, because they'd already gotten cowpox, and cowpox and smallpox are very, very similar. Similar enough so that the immune system, once it recognizes cowpox, will then recognize smallpox and go and get it. Okay, that's important. And here's why it's important. Cowpox and smallpox are very similar. And so you could immunize yourself against smallpox by giving somebody cowpox. But the viruses that make up the flu family are mutating so quickly, and the same for the cold. Why don't we have a vaccination for the cold? Why don't we just go and get a cold shot? And furthermore, why don't we have a cold shot when we're an infant and be protected against the cold for the rest of our lives? Why is it that we get colds at all? It's a virus. Why don't we just go and get a cold shot when we're kids and never, ever, ever get a cold again? Why does having the cold not protect us against having the cold again? The way that chickenpox does. You get chickenpox once. If you get chickenpox, you survive it. Your body recognizes chickenpox. Let's not get into shingles and all the rest of this stuff. I'm trying to keep things simple enough to understand. Why is it that you can have a cold and not get immunity to a cold? Why? It's not that way with virtually every other disease. Once you get it, you've got the immunity. You get measles, you get immune to measles, you don't get measles again. All these childhood diseases protect us for the rest of our lives. Why do we continue to get colds? We get colds because the virus that generates a cold is changing its outside so quickly and so constantly and so effectively that if I catch a cold today, my body would actually produce immunity against that cold. But the cold that comes in even 2 weeks from now has changed so much that my body doesn't recognize it. It doesn't recognize it. So the cold is always changing. And as Astronerd points out, having the cold only immunizes you, he's got it exactly right, against that cold. It's changing so fast that the next time you get a cold, it's not the same cold. It's having very similar experience to your body because the virus is very similar, but the outside of it has changed enough so that the immune response you had to your previous cold doesn't recognize the next cold. That's why you can get colds for the rest of your life, and many people do. Now we get down to the facts here. Now we get to the facts. COVID-19 is an influenza-type virus, which means it mutates very quickly. And because it mutates very quickly, two things happen. Number one, because it behaves like a flu, it's very infectious. It's very easy to catch. You can spread it through the air, which means that you cannot contain it. Once it's out of the gate, it's out. It's not going to be contained. It can't be. I'm fairly convinced that this is the case. It's going to spread, and there's no stopping it. And so that's one thing. The second thing is we don't have time to build a vaccine against this yet because we don't know enough about it yet. And we also don't know whether COVID-19 is changing fast enough to be immune resistant. It's going to spread. That's the bad news. The good news is that this particular virus is not terribly lethal. The mortality is really quite low. And when you look at how the mortality breaks out, it turns out that just about everybody has absolutely nothing to worry about. Many, if not most of the people that have this virus or have had it, recovered from it, didn't even know they had it. The virus was so weak in so many cases, the body was able to deal with it so well, a normal healthy immune system was able to deal with it so well that it was either at the very least a mild case of flu or in many cases, if not most cases, they didn't even know they had it. Yes, the virus is in me. Yes, the virus is multiplied. Its symptoms and its attacks are not so severe. The body basically just killed it, recognized it, and killed it. Whether or not I'm immune to it in the future remains to be decided. But it wasn't that big a threat, and so we killed it. And so I didn't even know I had the damn COVID-19. So far so good. So now we got a disease that's highly infectious and it's going to spread. The good news is it doesn't really hurt too many people, but some people it does, and some people it will kill. And that's not an insignificant number. That number is probably anywhere from 1% of the total population to 3% maybe. But when you really break it down, what you find out is that almost everybody is going to be exactly fine. I would go down tomorrow and catch this frickin' COVID-19. If I could, I'd get it tomorrow. I would get it tomorrow just to get it over with. Okay? It's not going to damage me. But there are two people in my family who really are at genuine risk here. One of them has a very severe respiratory problem, a lifelong acute respiratory problem, and the other one's my mom, who's in her late 90s. Those two people alone in my family that I'm able to look at are really at risk from COVID-19. And so what that's telling me is this, and this is the thing I really want to hear from Lord Bios. It's always great to have an expert here. Here's the way I look at things. We thought when you're dealing with Ebola, as an example, which is very lethal and you do not want to get Ebola, but because Ebola is not very infectious, you could build a wall around the cases of Ebola and contain the virus. Stay with me on this. Because Ebola is not very infectious, here's an outbreak of Ebola, quarantine that, isolate that. Here's an outbreak of Ebola, isolate that. Here's an isolate that. And since the disease is less than one, it will eventually burn itself out. You can build a wall around the outbreaks in Ebola. I don't think you can do that with an influenza virus. You can't contain it. And what I'm saying is you can't contain it. You can't build a wall around the virus. So what does that mean? That means you have to build a wall around the people that the virus will kill. Everybody's going to get the virus. But the wall can't be about containing the virus. The wall has to be now, because you can't build a wall that big. It's out. Now what we have to do is we have to identify the people who are at risk of being killed by this and build a wall around them. We have to protect the people who are at risk because this thing is getting out, it's going to get out, and not many people are going to matter. Most people won't even know it. So you have to protect the people who are at risk. You have to build a wall of protection around the people who, if they do get it, will pay for it. And that is possible. That's what an isolation ward is for. That's what we can do. But when somebody says we're going to cancel the Boston Marathon, all they've done is scare the living daylights out of people, and it does absolutely nothing. It does nothing. It's not going to stop this. All it does is scare people. And it scares people into pulling resources out of the system that they don't need. I don't need cotton masks, and I don't need antiviral medication because this COVID-19 virus has got no chance against me. I'm in extremely good health. It's not going to touch me. I'm probably not even going to know I have it. I've certainly had worse, and so on. But resources in terms of medicine, doctors, vaccines, medical gloves, all of this stuff that's actually needed, that stuff needs to be built around people like my sib and my mom and all the other millions of people out here who will die from this disease if we don't protect them from it. But we can't protect them from it by stopping the virus. The virus is out. We got to build a wall around them. We can't build a wall around the virus. And all we're doing is watching on the news every single day as people get more and more and more panicked as the wall around the virus gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and people say, my God, this thing is getting out. It is getting out. It's going to get out. And it doesn't matter if you're not one of these people, small number of people who are at risk here. So why don't we start talking about this like adults? Why don't we have an adult conversation with adult people and say, listen, this is the flu. It's a form of the flu. It's a particularly dangerous form of the flu if you are old, weak, respiratory conditions and so on. The first guy who died in America of COVID-19 was a guy whose health was so poor he was barely alive in the first place. I mean, he was in extreme respiratory distress. And it turned out he had the virus. And it turned out that may have put him over the edge. So people hear a death in America and they, oh my God, And think about the Chinese. Think about what the Chinese did. First of all, when you're talking about mortality numbers and numbers of death, the Chinese smoke like chimneys. All of them, as a culture, cigarette smoking is enormously, enormously more prevalent than it is in American culture today. And so if you've been smoking a long time, your lungs are already in trouble. They're already fighting against a problem that you've put there. They're already degraded. They've already suffered damage. They're already scar tissue. All of that stuff. So if you drop an airborne virus into a population that smokes and one that doesn't, the one that smokes is going to take a bigger hit because they're already more at risk. They've already got more damage done to the system. But a great example of what I'm trying to get clear here is that look at what China did when this virus broke out. They built a wall around Wuhan. Now forget about whether or not the wall got out. Let's just say for the sake of the argument that they put a glass dome over Wuhan and managed to contain the virus. Okay? Let's just say that. And they built this enormous resource of building this wall around Wuhan. And I don't know what the number is here either, but let's say for the sake of the argument that there's 1 million people inside that wall. So they spent this resource to build a wall around 1 million people. And of that 1 million people, 990,000 and some other hundreds of them are fine. The people who died inside that wall died whether the wall would have been there or not. Likewise, the people inside the wall would have lived whether the wall would have been there or not. Instead of trying to circle the entire city of Wuhan, what they had to do is they had to go out and find the people who were at risk and isolate those people. And they didn't. They isolated the entire city. And so the virus spread. If they had realized what this thing was, and they probably did, certainly they did before they admitted it, then instead of sealing off Wuhan, they should have done was they should have gone through the entire city and said, anybody over the age of 60, anybody over the age of 70, especially over 80, especially over 90, especially anybody who has a history of heart failure, anybody with heart disease, anybody with respiratory problems, you people come with us. And you would have saved a lot more lives that way. But that's not what happened. And that's not what's happening here. They're scaring the living daylights out of everybody about a virus that's not going to be a fatal problem, if a problem at all, to virtually everybody in the country. And what is happening is people are falling apart and people are getting scared and people do stupid things when they get scared. And the best case scenario of a scared population is that they grab resources that are needed to protect the people who are actually at fault. If everybody who gets a cold from now on or the flu is convinced that they've got Covid19 and they trot themselves down to the hospital and demand medical care because they've got a real cold or a real flu and they're showing symptoms, then what they're doing is they're pulling limited medical resources away from the people who genuinely now need these resources in order to survive. And this is the message that somebody has to get across to people. And I haven't seen it done yet, so I'm going to have to do it. And if I do it, I've got to get this one exactly right. I've got to get this exactly right. This isn't political opinion. This isn't what I think about things. This is life and death situation. But I think you can not only relieve people's fear, but you can also save a lot of lives if you treat them as adults. They don't have to be bacteriologists or epidemiologists or virologists. They have to be just a basic adult. Somebody wants to see the whole shirt. Medium speed. Some drag. Right? This is what somebody has to do. Somebody has to speak to the American people and the people of the world as if they were adults and say, listen, this is an influenza virus. It's going to get out. It is not containable. It's already not contained. To the degree that we can contain it, we should. But this business of canceling public events is like trying to cancel a public event to prevent the spread of the common cold, and it's not going to work. It's not only not going to work, it's going to scare the daylights out of people. What we need to do is we need to say that virtually everybody with a healthy immune system and people in certain categories, we say the history of this disease so far is that you will, if you develop symptoms, will develop flu-like symptoms. Many people will not develop symptoms at all. So don't panic about the flu spreading if you're a healthy person. But if it turns out you have a history of heart disease or you're of an advanced age, if you have an immunosuppressed disease, if you've got any kind of respiratory predisposition, if you've got any kind of internal damage to your lungs or to your heart valves, anything that having a serious flu would put you more at risk for, you need to be protected but we're not going to protect you by trying to ban the Boston Marathon. You're going to need to come to an isolation ward in a hospital. And finally, on top of all of this, prevention stuff, the one thing that nobody's talking about is it's not like we're exactly unarmed in this fight, you know. This is not 1919. This isn't 1920. This is 2020. And if somebody who is susceptible, somebody who's in a high mortality group, comes down with COVID-19, this doesn't mean they're going to die. It may mean they're going to die if they're left out in the middle of a field someplace, but they're not here anyway. It means that even if you're a high-risk person where the disease has a high mortality rate, it means that now you can now, okay, so Lord Bio says severe pneumonia. That's what ends up killing patients. He's right. The people who died from the influenza pandemic, almost all of them died from pneumonia. The immune system was so busy fighting the influenza that the pneumonia got into your, it's a bacterial infection, and it can be. And so you die of secondary diseases. That's what AIDS does. AIDS doesn't kill you. AIDS has never killed a single person ever. The AIDS virus doesn't kill you. The AIDS virus weakens your immune system to the point where you can't defend yourself against common things that people just fight off every single day. People die of common things with AIDS because their immune system is gone. So even if you get COVID-19, and even if you have existing lung condition or heart condition or so on, you'd be in real trouble if you were untreated. But this is not the country, and really, to some large degree, not the world, where things go untreated. If you have it, and you develop extreme pneumonia, we have still got some terms. We've got antivirals that will slow the spread of the virus, and we have antibiotics, and this is the final thing that has to be said. We have maybe one, I don't know, we have so overprescribed antibiotics that viruses and bacteria, because antibiotics have no effect on viruses whatsoever. But because we have made antibiotics like tetracycline so easily available, tetracycline has killed virtually all of the bacteria that causes these diseases, but the ones that were resistant to tetracycline had survived the battle with tetracycline. It's an inverse. Instead of the body fighting against the bacteria, now the bacteria is fighting against science. Those few bacteria that survived their encounter with tetracycline as an antibiotic are either immune to or resistant to tetracycline. And so all of these antibiotics that we've used and arguably overused are less effective now because these bacteria are resistant to them. Now, I don't remember the name of it, but I'll get it in 8 seconds because that's the delay time on the live stream here, comment stream. But we have held in reserve one very, very powerful antibiotic, and it is not prescribed unless it is absolutely life or death, and even then under certain circumstances. Thank God we had the wisdom to do that. We had a wisdom to hold on to one antibiotic and use it so infrequently and make sure that nothing gets out of that room. Is it Cipro? That we had John Pershing says it's single malt scotch for the win. So we do have antibiotics that still can come in and go after the diseases that this virus can make you weak of and weak to. So that's the situation as I see it. And then there's one final thing. Yeah, Lord Bio says antibacterial resistance is the greatest threat to humanity today. Absolutely right. We came up with this miracle weapon and we overdeployed it, and as the body becomes immune and resistant to disease, then the disease becomes immune and resistant to the medicine. But anyway, the final thing I think that we have to accept is this, and this is the thing no one's talking about because no one wants to talk about it. We do not have a right to live our lives as if nothing can ever happen to us. We don't. We don't have the right to live our life as if we have. We don't have our. We do not have a right to perfect health. All of us, all the time. We don't. It'd be nice to think that, and it's a measure of how successful science and medicine is, and people like Walter Reed and the Yellow Fever Commission, the people who gave their lives for this and Pasteur and Jenner and Lister and all the rest of them. We have been so astonishingly successful at this that we have now reached the point where we expect that it is our right as Americans to never get a fatal disease. And infectious diseases scare us in a way that nothing else does. And I think that's so deep in us you could almost say it's genetic. People fear cancer, and rightfully so. And they fear many other things, rightfully so. But plague scares us on a level that nothing else does. And this is what people are feeling now. They're feeling deep in that root of the brain. They're feeling that this is going to cost us everything. Relative gets cancer, you feel sorry. You get cancer, you feel even sorrier. But if a relative has bubonic plague and you realize you may have it and everybody has it and your children have it and the whole world's going to end, that's the kind of fear that's starting to develop out there, and that's what we have to do something about. But one of the things we have to face is we do not have a right to live forever in perfect health. We believe we do, and we've come to believe we do because medicine and science has been so effective that it's given us the ability to live this kind of a life where we have the illusion of this as being somehow so much real that it's a right, but it's not. And the bottom line here is, what I'm really trying to say is, we won't really be able to deal with this disease, or any other disease for that matter, until we understand that, yes, an intelligent approach to it means we all have to fear less than usual. And yes, we need to understand that we need to protect the people who are at risk. And yes, we have medicines that can combat these things. And yes to all of these things. But this is a new disease and it's going to kill people. And that's all there is to it. It's all there is to it. And if you want to keep score, and sometimes I do, sometimes I keep score because score gives us perspective. If COVID-19 is a new form of virus, a new form of flu that is more deadly than regular flu, and it kills 2 or 3% of the population that is high at risk, then that's a tragedy. And I'm not demeaning it. But if you want to keep score, the addition of COVID-19 to the human race is nothing like the win that we got when we eliminated smallpox from the face of the earth, and the same for yellow fever to all intents and purposes, and the same for malaria, and the same for typhus, and the same for cholera, all of it. When you think about the string of victories that we have had against infectious diseases, we have been so spectacularly successful against these diseases that we have come to a point where we believe that we should be literally immune from everything. And that's just not true. Polio, measles, typhus, cholera. 100 years ago, if you had 10 kids, the reason you had 10 kids 100 years ago, my grandfather moved to the United States from England in 1915, and he had 9 children, and all of his ancestors had 8, 9, or 10 children. The reason you had 10 children was not just because there was no form of convenient birth control. The reason you'd have 10 children was because 4 of them wouldn't make it to 16. That was just life. And you accepted it. And if you think those people didn't care, if you think that you were sitting there in 1880 and you had a 2-year-old daughter die of yellow fever or scarlet fever or whooping cough or measles, tuberculosis, name it. If you think that parent losing that 2-year-old daughter hurt less to them than it would to you, you got another thing coming. It's not how it works. It's just ongoing, rampant, perpetual grief. And we have been given a world free of that through enormous efforts of adults who have been able to face these things, and the bravery of men like Walter Reed that go into areas infected with yellow fever in order to figure out why yellow fever kills people, and then to eventually find out why and cure yellow fever. We just need to grow up and face the fact that we're going to take some hits from this disease, and we're going to do our best to fight it, and we're going to do amazing things to fight it, but we're going to take some hits, and that's unavoidable. And to demand otherwise is not only unrealistic and destructive, it's actually immoral. It's an insult to what life really is. It's an insult to how far we've come, and it's an insult to the entire idea that these things can be fought. That's not to say that you can't grieve somebody. Somebody dies from a disease, doesn't matter what the disease is, it hurts just the same. But to become hysterical over this is not only not going to do us any good, it's immoral, and it's beneath us as a species. Yeah. It's beneath us. We need to understand how far we've come, and we need to keep going, and we need to correct our mistakes, and we need to continue to improve. And it can improve, and it will improve. There has not been, as I record this on March 5th, 2020, there has not been a single fatality from a crash of a major airline carrier in the United States in 20 years, 40, 50,000 flights a day. 20 years have passed, almost. 2001 was the last one, in just after 9/11 attacks, have passed since that happened. Since the last time there was a big plane crash where people died, 20 years have passed. You know why? You know why that's happened? It's not luck, and it's nothing random about it. The reason we haven't had a major commercial jetliner crash in 20 years. Hi, we're good. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye. The reason we haven't had a commercial jetliner crash in 20 years was because we had a lot of them crash before 20 years. And we learned things from them. We didn't just go out and make the same mistakes again. We had the courage and the wisdom and the discipline to find out what was causing these airlines crashes, and one by one, we just eliminated them. We just did. And it's essentially what we've done with disease too. We've just one by one figured them out and put a stop to them through discipline and reason and logic and courage. And nobody gets on a plane today that I'm aware of, except for me and maybe a handful of other people in the entire world. Nobody gets on a plane today and says, it's amazing that this plane is not going to crash today. Because it's not. And you have to remember that the reason I can get on that aircraft with 100% confidence is because of all of the people who got on an airplane with 50% confidence, and then 60% confidence, and then 80% confidence, then 90% confidence. The courage of those people to continue flying, and the accidents that resulted were the lessons that we learned as a society. In a weird sort of way, that's how we immunized ourselves against aircraft accidents. We had enough of them to recognize them, and 20 years of 40, 50,000 flights a day is not coincidence. It's not. It'll never be perfect. There are going to be crashes of commercial jets in this country in the future, but they're not going to be anything like what happened in the past. And whatever happens next will mean that won't happen again. And that's kind of the way I look at Covid-19. It's like it's a blip after an incredible victory. Oh, here's something new we didn't know. Okay, well, we're going to pay for this lesson. But so much of the work has been done in air safety and in public health. So much of it has been done that it's shameful for us to make such a hysterical reaction when you consider the amount of ground that we've covered and how much ground we've already gained, and what people prior to us had to endure. That's it, you know. Yeah, I'd love to be I think the whole argument that I just made about this virus is nothing but good news for people who are used to thinking that they're all going to die. But there's never perfect good news. There's never a zero chance that the plane you're going to get in is going to crash. But if you get on a plane tomorrow, the chance that your plane is going to crash is so close to zero, it might as well be. And when you think about the number of people that have died from these horrible diseases since there have been, not since there have been people, since there's been life on Earth, it's a bit shameful to be invoking the kind of rage and fear that we invoke. And that is a product of our own success. And if we're gonna have the hysteria, okay, but can we at least have the recognition of why we're hysterical about it? If we're gonna get hysterical and cancel things like public events that won't have any impact on this at all, because we're so terrified of something so relatively impotent. If we're going to do that, can we not at least recognize that this hysteria is due to the success that we've had, the staggering success that we've had, and the realization too that as we understand, we fought this battle for centuries to understand how these life forms like bacteria and these half-life forms like viruses work. And everything we've done so far has been to prevent them from damaging us. And one of the ways we've prevented them from damaging us in the case of smallpox is we've simply eradicated it. It has run out of food and died. It exists in a few small test tubes around the world, but it's gone. It's dead. We killed it. Smallpox, that particular virus, is gone. And we did that by depriving it of its fuel. But now, for the first time in human history, we are understanding things on a level where we may now be able to simply say, we're not going to wait for smallpox. We know what smallpox's RNA sequence or COVID's RNA sequence looks like, and we're going to go out and get it. We're not going to wait for it to come here. We're now at the point where we are beginning to understand genetic engineering to the degree where we will be able to say to the cold virus, we're not going to take this shit anymore, cold virus. We know how you work, we know how you change, and we know that your ability to change is faster than our immune system, but it's not faster than our intellect. And very soon, we're going to start constructing protein-sized devices that are just going to seek you out and destroy you. And that'll be the end of you. And it's not going to be the end of us. So there. I just love being a human being. I swear to God, I do. I am immeasurably proud of this species. Always have been. I never understood this human hate. I never have. Never, ever understood it. Maybe next time we'll have a long conversation about why we may be the only intelligent life in the universe. I think there's a strong case that we are now, and I think it's stronger every day the more I think about it. Excuse me. No, let me rephrase that. That I think we may be the only, well, given the size of the universe and the number of chances, but I think intelligence in technology is so much rarer than we think. I think the galaxy is essentially completely empty of vehicles, but filled with life. But in any event, we've done pretty well for ourselves, and we ain't done yet. And parenthetically, it looks like we may not have to go through another dark ages before we make another big step. Anyway. Thanks for listening, everybody. I know I see a lot of things go by in the comment section, so let me just replay two things. And one of them is this. Julius, I don't have your email address. If you can send it to info@billwhittle.com, I can correspond with you, but we will be there. Natasha and I are both looking forward to it very much. And the second thing is Lord Bios, also info@billwhittle.com. If you could just mention this conversation. I've been waiting to talk to somebody like you. I've put out some emails trying to find somebody who really understood what was going on, and I need to be right about this. And he just said, remember, don't panic. And this is the last thing that's really important. In 1920, they found out after it was over that one of the reasons that people got so scared was because all the government did was say, "Don't panic." This is a profound, and this is part of my wheelhouse, not the biology by any means or the medicine, but this is something I understand. Most of the fear that was generated in 1919, 1920 was generated by the government saying there's nothing to worry about and that it's under control. And this is something I have some expertise in. The pandemic, influenza pandemic at 1919, 1920 came in three waves. The first wave in the spring was pretty mild, and if you got it in the spring, you were actually pretty lucky, because when it came back in the fall, that was when the real deadly one came. And then there was kind of like an echo of it, a third wave that came. But in the serious one, and the one in the fall, October of 1919, there was one city in America that had significantly lower mortality than virtually every other city. And remember, this isn't driven by mosquitoes or anything. This is a very highly contagious disease. And that city, of all places, was San Francisco. And one of the reasons that San Francisco did much better than other cities was because San Francisco is one of the few places in the country that told the people the truth in the newspapers. Didn't lie to them. Told them everything that they knew. Told them what they knew about prevention. Told them what they could do. And didn't just continue to say, "Don't panic, it's under control," as more and more people died. This, to me, is the big lesson of that, and what we're seeing now, and what I'd like to do my little part to try and prevent. When you say don't panic, that's exactly the message you need to send, but you can't just say don't panic. What you need to say is, here's why you don't need to panic. Because if you just say don't panic, people panic. Anyway, I'll do it for this edition of the Stratosphere Lounge, made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com, who continue to keep these lights on here, and for whom we are eternally grateful. Let me just take a quickie look at my calendar here. I don't think I'm out of town next week. I know I will be out of town 2 weeks after that, because I'm going to Georgia to watch somebody get married. Looks like we're here next weekend. Next Thursday, so I expect to see you then. Thank you for all the kind comments and all the kind remarks. It was just one of those. Best way I can describe what happened to me last week was my favorite quote from Abraham Lincoln, who, as you probably know, was a woodcutter, and for many years of his life he made a living with his axe. And Lincoln once said, he said, "If I had 6 hours to chop down trees, I'd spend 4 hours sharpening my axe." That's a man who knows his job. Number one, the best way to keep chopping down the most trees possible is to keep sharpening the axe. And looking back on it, I realized I was just hacking harder and harder and harder with a particularly duller and duller blade, and finally I just said, I can't do this anymore. Just kind of said, I'm out of energy. I'm exhausted. I went home and slept for a week, and feel much better now. Because even sometimes like a vacation, even a great vacation to Mexico or something, is still, there's a kind of it's not relaxation in the same way as, like, I'm not going to take a shower for a week. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to sit in bed. I'm going to sleep and sleep and sleep and sleep and sleep. And when I feel like getting up, I'll get up. And that's genuine. That's bed rest is what that is, and that's what I needed. Anyway, that'll do it. So thanks to everybody for watching, as always. It's a good time to be alive, and it's getting better by the day. So that'll do it for the Stratosphere Lounge. We'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.